Sound good to the panelists? Thumbs up, awesome. Get that out of the way. Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here. Welcome to webinar 2 of the Alaska Food Policy Council's 2021 Food Transportation Discussion Series. My name is Rachel Miller and I chair the Alaska Food Policy Council, which really means I get to work with an amazing group of people across the state who are working on food security, food sovereignty, and food system resilience in a variety of ways. So I'm just really honored to be here today, and we have a really exciting panel lined up for you to talk about one of a key component in our food system, which is cold storage. So before we get started, we wanted to let everyone know that this is a recorded webinar. We will post it to the Alaska Food Policy Council website for viewing after the fact. So if you can only tune in for part of this today, not a problem. Before that, also want to encourage anyone, if you are on Zoom currently, you are welcome to change your name, highlight your location. We will also provide a questionnaire at the end of this webinar for folks to give more input on our webinar series. If you have ideas for future webinars or discussions, you want to get involved in AFPC, but primarily the questionnaire is going to be gauging your interest in talking more about cold storage and how you perceived today's webinar. So we will be active in the chat today. Feel free to also add any comments or questions in the chat along the way. And we also want to take a second to recognize that we, across the state, the Alaska Food Policy Council recognizes that we live, work, play, and eat on and from Indigenous lands. And we think it's important to recognize the lands that you live, work, and play and eat from. And so if you are curious to learn more or don't already know, there's the number has been updated. I just found this out today. So if you want to learn more about the lands on which you sit, text your zip code or city and state to that number, and give you a second to get that number down. And this is what it looks like. I'm currently on Whidbey Island, and that was what I learned this morning about where I am. And in an effort to make, land acknowledgements and inclusion and diversity and equity initiatives more than performance, more than performative, Alaska Food Policy Council has launched an Indigenous Foods Committee, and we welcome anyone to join our committees and to do some work to impact our food system. So if you're curious to learn more, please reach out and we are happy to chat. So what is the Alaska Food Policy Council? We simply work to create a healthier, more secure, and more self-reliant Alaska by improving our food system. And we do that through connecting, advocating, and informing. Some of you may have attended our conference. We just wrapped up in November of 2020, our 5th. It's every 18 months, so it's not annual, but we run a conference every 18 months. We've run them in Fairbanks, in Homer, in Anchorage, and our next one is coming up in March 2022. And so that's how most people have been exposed to the Alaska Food Policy Council. But we also have committees and working groups that work on advocacy and policy issues. We're excited to engage more youth in some of these initiatives. So don't be, if you're under 18, that's okay. Please reach out if you're interested to learn more. Advocacy and policy, food waste, Indigenous foods. I know there's one more I'm missing. We do a lot, and if you want to propose your own working group, you're welcome to do so as well. So all that to say, please join today. We do have a membership structure and we offer free memberships, and that puts you on our newsletter mailing list to stay updated to the latest happenings in Alaska's food system. And you can check that out at akfoodpolicycouncil.org. And please, again, check the chat. Robbie is our chat master. She's linking all the links that I'm mentioning. So welcome today. This is the schedule. It's packed, as you can see. We mostly today wanted to have an organic, approachable conversation with experts in our cold chain in Alaska to talk about the current needs, some challenges that we have that happen when you're moving food to the state and around the state. Cold storage was a game-changing innovation in food security, but we still struggle to access it in all of our communities in the state. So we have invited these wonderful experts who have been giving of their time. We're going to do self-introductions in a second, but to highlight, we have Ronalda Anguson from Alaska Village Initiatives, also an AFPC board member, Jody Anderson from the UAF Matanuska Experiment Farm and Extension Center, I would say also soil enthusiast at the least. Micah Hahn, University of Alaska Anchorage, was instrumental in getting the Climate Action Plan for Anchorage launched. The Copper, and also with the Copper Valley Fish Initiative, Melissa Hoyer with Spork Consulting and the Sioux Salmon Co., Aaron Young of Blood, Sweat, and Food Farms down in Homer, and our moderator today is Brian Himmelblum, board member of the Alaska Food Policy Council. Brian's down on Kodiak, also food processing expert. And I will show you that slide later. So let's get into it. Let's go ahead and do self-introductions. I'll stop sharing so we can see our speakers. And Brian, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks for the handoff, Rachel, and greetings, everybody. I come from the broadcasting from the land of the Supaic, original people of Kodiak Island and the archipelago. So welcome all. And I'm not going to really introduce myself any more than what Rachel said, because I want to get to the speakers. But my role here is just to keep things rolling, and let's just go for it. Does anyone want to go first, or do you want to go in order of what we saw on the previous slide? I wasn't sure. We didn't draw straws.
Yeah, we can start with Ronalda.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Ronalda Anguson. I'm the Agriculture Program Director at Alaska Village Initiatives. In this position, I work with partners in communities throughout the state on food security, food sovereignty, and any kind of agriculture project that is brought to us, we pretty much help with. And like Rachel said, I'm a AFPC board member, and I also sit on the Indigenous Food Safety Committee for the University of Arkansas. That's just for work. On my personal side, I own a fishing operation and I own a fishing boat in Bristol Bay, and I go out every summer.
Next, maybe we can hear from Aaron Young, just across the bay from me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm one of the co-owners and managers of Blood, Sweat, and Food Farms down in Homer, Alaska. We are a diversified pasture-based livestock operation here. And in the past couple of years, we have been tackling the cold storage issue on our own farm, and also for the farmers of our area. We recently purchased a reefer truck that's allowed us to haul temperature sensitive goods from Homer all the way up and along the stops between Anchorage for ourselves, but also for other producers as well. And we have plans to put in other cold storage facilities, and can't wait to talk about that more.
Great, thank you. Let's go up the road to Melissa Hewer in Anchorage, I believe.
I am in Anchorage, thanks. I'm Melissa Hoyer with Sport Consulting and Sioux Salmon Company. And as a consultant, I do work on all sorts of projects, from assessments to grant management and grant writing, and have been involved in a number of different projects and with different clients looking at cold storage options. And I've also done, it's getting a little bit older now, finished up a report in 2018 that looked closely at cold storage needs around Anchorage and the Mat-Su. And then prior to that, a smaller part of a different assessment down in the Kenai Peninsula as well. And so definitely there's some cold storage needs with Sioux Salmon Co. is a very small direct to market fish operation we run in the summertime as well. So.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And let's go across town and over to Micah Hahn.
Hey guys, I'm Micah. I am a professor of environmental public health at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and I'm also the owner of Copper Valley Fish Collective. And so I think that Rachel asked me to be on the panel. I have sort of two different thoughts about cold storage needs. And one, she mentioned the Anchorage Climate Action Plan. So I worked with the municipality of Anchorage to help put that plan together and sort of facilitate conversations among all the working group members about what we need in Anchorage to both decrease our greenhouse gases and also help everyone adapt and become more resilient in the face of changing climate. And one of the topics that came up was the need for shared food system assets, and one of those being cold storage for people that maybe don't have chest freezers or space, or renters, or maybe have more than can fit in a personal freezer. So I'd love to chat about that if we get that way. And then in the summer, my husband and I, like many others on the call, it seems like, are commercial fishermen. Yay, Alaska. And we direct market our salmon to the lower 48. And so have experienced the cold storage squeeze personally in Alaska. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. And then we'll go up the road to Jody Anderson, coming to us live from Palmer.
Thank you, Brian. And thanks so much, Alaska Food Policy Council, for this opportunity. My name is Jody Anderson, and I'm with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I am the director of the Matanuska Experiment Farm and Extension Center here in lovely Palmer, Alaska, on Denai traditional lands. And here at the farm, it's very interesting. And for years, we've worked with local producers. And then also we do have a statewide connection. And we're seeing all over the state that there's such a huge need for the cold chain maintenance of our produce and our fish and meats. And so that's, a huge food safety issue. And the infrastructure just is lacking in that. And we here at the farm experience that. We do have walk-in coolers that are aging rapidly and are actually out of date, but still working, so we let them. But we host a site that is a collaboration project with Alaska Pacific University and their farm in Palmer, on the north side of Palmer, and it's the Alaska Tilth Project. And that program each year is slightly different, but last year's was just phenomenal, where not only was produce grown and distributed to food insecure agencies in the valley, predominantly in years past and especially last year, both Kids Cupboard and the Alaska Food Bank. But those vegetables have to be cooled and stored somewhere to pull them all together. And fortunately, we've been that location, but there aren't very many of these available. Certainly, an opportunity for a food hub that requires the storage of vegetables is something that isn't available in most communities. And so we have an interesting perspective on that. And so I do like to fish, but I'm not a commercial fisherman. So I think my role today is going to be on the produce and vegetable side. So thank you.
Very nice, Jody. Thank you. And great introductions. I think that sets the stage, kind of the foundation. Everyone has kind of touched on the great need. Some of you are already developing plans such as external storage. So going through the questions, I think we covered a couple of things. I guess it really boils down to who are going to be the movers and shakers, the decision makers, let's say, for attracting investments in cold chain. I think many of us are aware that there's a $60 million cold storage facility that's going to be going up in Anchorage, and that will be maybe a conversation later we'll have with a representative from that organization. But let's just start the conversation about in terms of investments. Does anyone want to take that? I mean, should the state be the investor? Should it be private? Should it be a public-private partnership? And I'll just open it up to the panel.
I can jump in with just an initial start. I think that the answer to that question varies hugely. You know, I think locally within the rail system, or certainly within more of the hub communities on the rail system, there is quite a bit of storage that isn't well advertised or organized, and of varying quality. Some of it is listed as available that I don't think would meet food safety standards, and others is, you know, the prices range from all over the place. I don't know. I think there needs to be a kind of an inventory and a list for people to figure out what is available and where. And depending, you know, a lot of people don't need cold storage year round. It's pretty cyclical for most folks, not all. And some of those seasons change. So there's, you know, different, unfortunately, you know, fall is a huge need for mostly everybody. But other times of the year, there isn't so much demand. I think in more rural parts off the road system, there's big issues with cold storage at airports. You know, there's so much product being shipped in and out of airports. And if you have weather delays or other transportation issues, that's a big one. And I think the government, with some of the FAA grants and some of those programs, could probably step into those roles more easily and benefit a much broader group of providers. There's a lot of different programs that depend on those storage programs, and individuals that depend on that product coming in and out. So I think it really varies quite a bit.
Great, thanks for that explanation. You've touched on the a real sore point is, you know, what happens with, for example, bypass mail shipping goods and foods that are extremely perishable, and Alaska Commercial Company has been trying to address that. And they've talked about the same kinds of things. Unfortunately, the food that's at the bypass mail rates, it's sent out there just like it's mail, and not as a extremely valuable commodity that needs to be handled and stored well. Does someone else want to take a shot after Melissa? For example, let's go to Aaron talking about why did you invest in a refrigerated facility?
Yeah, so we were on the fence for several years about getting a reefer truck. So the reefer truck is one piece of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle for us is long-term fixed storage, just like most places. Here in Homer, there is really not a good option for long-term storage that you can simply rent. We are getting to the point where we do about 3,000 chickens a year. That doesn't count our turkeys, our hogs, other things that we need stored for customers for a certain period of time. We are getting to the point where we are beyond the chest freezer stage. And honestly, for a lot of small and medium producers, that's what they're relying on. But it's not a cost-effective solution. One, because electricity is ridiculously expensive in our state. Using chest freezers is not an efficient way to, store cold storage product. It's too expensive. Two, it's just not quite the capacity that we're looking for. So we are developing a fixed cold storage option in Homer, primarily to give small and medium producers and members of the public as well consistent, sustainable, flexible storage space. So what we would like to see is a storage space that's, as useful for one pallet of goods as it is for 20 pallets of goods. The options that currently exist, again, we don't really have very many options. We work with a couple local businesses who are gracious and supporting what we need in terms of cold storage, but it's not really a sustainable or long-term option. And of course, like, they have their own business needs that they need, a lot of fish producers in town, et cetera. And so what we're looking for is something that will support those small to medium producers that are kind of in between the stage of like small farmers that really can rely just on chest freezers or, refrigerators, and the large commercial scale, like Linden kind of aspect. Something that's convenient, that is sustainable, meaning that there's a really good business plan in place that is cost effective for producers, but offers an economic incentive for that cold storage to exist on a long-term basis. I think for us, we are looking ahead towards our needs, but we're also looking ahead and listening to the farmers around us. There's a huge market for people that could, vegetable producers to extend their season in the fall, obviously, but also we're hearing from a lot of small scale fishermen that are trying to do direct to market. And if you're trying to do direct to market, you've got to have a place to store that. And for us, like, we are really focused on how do we build the infrastructure that is going to carry the food system in Alaska through for the next several decades. Right now we're kind of at the point where we are building that scaffolding for the local food system, and cold storage is a huge part of that. So how can we do that in a way that is sustainable through more than 5, 10, 15 years, but looking ahead to creating a system that will work for decades to come? And I think for us, it really comes down to having a sustainable business model that makes sense for producers and makes sense for the people that are running the facility. So that's where we're kind of coming at with it. I think like where we see the huge gap is for those medium producers that are ready to make the jump to, maybe they're not completely full-time huge fishermen, but they're way beyond the chest freezer refrigerator stage, and trying to encourage as many of those like medium to medium large scale producers as we possibly can. And I'm very excited to hear about the facility in Anchorage. I'm going to be eager to hear more about that as that kind of comes along, because I do think, we're in the middle of planning and building that cold storage facility in Homer. And I think it's going to be extremely important to have those cold storage hubs in key strategic parts of the state, like Anchorage, like Homer to serve the Kenai Peninsula, Anchorage further up. Like, if we can plan those things ahead of time, that's going to also really add to the sustainability of the system for many years to come. So strategically placing them in a way that everyone can get to them and they can rely on them. I think what a lot of producers need is they need a consistent, reliable business partner that they know are going to be there for, as long as they need them.
Great, thank you, Erin. You touched on fisheries, so let's bring Ronalda in and go ahead, go for it.
Okay, so yeah, just reiterating, we need the cold storage at the airports, especially in some of those hub communities in rural Alaska. I'll use the example for us, for my personal boat and operation. Last season, of course, it was chaotic because of COVID. We had to quarantine for a month. So that meant for that whole month, I had to feed my crew and keep them in a house. And all the food that I had sent down, there's no cold storage in king salmon. It gets off the plane, it's put in the warehouse with everything else. It may or may not have a freeze sticker on it, but they're not necessarily gonna see it and call me and say, come down and get it right away. And the problem we ran into is every fisherman in Bristol Bay decided to use the same totes. And so when people just go grab their stuff, they grab everything, and we lost food from other people picking it up. We lost a massive amount of frozen meat because it thawed. The warehouse workers didn't find it, and it thawed. And so I had to start all over and have somebody else send it down, and it cost so much. I think we lost, just in the meat alone, we lost $2,000. And then the shipping down, we had to spend another $1,000. And then of course the $2,000 to replace it. So I see that need. And then we are also working towards self-marketing and sorry, I'm getting a bunch of messages at once. Self-marketing and our own fish and processing. And to do that, we have to have the cold storage. Currently, if we decide to bring home a home pack, we fish for Trident. Trident puts the fish in their freezers. Well, if we're gonna do it ourselves, they're certainly not gonna hold our product for us, which means we're either gonna have to buy property and put something down there, or find a business that's willing to help. And it's just not cost effective. The rates in Bristol Bay are crazy high. So we just don't, we've looked at property, we've looked at purchasing like a big facility, we've looked at a small facility, just so we can store our food. And that's just for the season and some fish. I can't imagine living there and having to deal with that on a constant basis. And part of what I'm doing at AVI is we're trying to build up our agriculture producers. And with that, they need a place to store their produce. They need a place to store whatever they're raising and whatever they're harvesting, and try to keep it year round as much as they can, because the planes and the cargo doesn't always get there. And without the cold storage, that food doesn't stay edible.
Great, thanks, Ronaldo. And you touch on, one of the key drivers in determining if some community or organization or company can afford the electrical costs for running coolers and freezers 24/7. I just was at the annual meeting of the Kodiak Electric Co-op Association, and it's a nonprofit cooperative, and they provided a very stark graph. They compared the costs from 10 years ago, where we were fourth in the cost of doing business, and now 2020 we're number one when we compare these other communities, which were Anchorage, Homer, and the third one. And our costs have not changed in 10 years because we're just about 100% renewable energy. And if you're not renewable at this point in time, that's like kind of like a deal breaker, because it was very stark. They showed, as Aaron was mentioning, the cost in that graph. It showed that Homer's costs over the last 10 years have gone up 154%.
Yeah, and I think sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, then I wanted to switch it over. I saw some chats about infrastructure that kind of ties into the whole, the big issue is, how do you afford it? And I think Rachel and Robbie, you had some comments before we go on back on the other questions.
As everyone's talking about, I'm thinking about this from a transaction perspective as we look just at cold storage. And just like every other food systems conversation, it blows up into a systems-wide discussion because food is related to everything. So when I think about cold storage access, I'm thinking about the inputs needed to gain access, which is often funding, right? So you need investment or debt or cash. And then you need the ability to make it run. So you need the electricity or the diesel, which sounds like that's not a long-term sustainable solution for a lot of communities. You need the space to do it that is easily accessible. And then you need a model that has operating revenue, right? And then you need humans to operate it, keep it safe, keep it certified. And so my question earlier about like, where is the responsibility? Who should be in charge of ensuring that Alaska has adequate cold storage or cold chain infrastructure if we're valuing food security, other than economic bottom line, if we're valuing food security as something our state needs to do, which the governor did in the State of his State address this year, who should be responsible? And Jody, your comments about the cold storage, which I've seen and was truly a game changer for increasing food access for hungry mouths last summer, if that infrastructure is outdated, who should we be asking for more funding? And Melissa's comment about leveraging some of this COVID money that's coming out of the federal government, I'd be curious to hear from each of our panelists how you currently are funding your cold structure and how you would like to see that change if grant matches are you can't overcome those. So I'd love to know more what's going on currently and what you would like to see from a funding perspective. That was a lot. Sorry.
I don't think that I can address all of your points in one response, Rachel, but I will say, like, when Aaron was talking, there were a few things maybe in terms of like the structure, I feel like that would be useful. She's totally spot on, I feel like, with the medium-sized producers and sort of being like the sweet spot of people that I feel like there's a big gap. And also the super seasonal needs, which both of those things together from an individual. So I guess to directly answer your question, should it be the individual business owner's responsibility? I feel like for me, because of the size and seasonal nature of our business, it doesn't make sense for me personally to invest in infrastructure like for my single business. So I love their approach of like a collective space, a shared space where multiple types of food that maybe have different seasons can go in together. And also I feel like another thing that lends itself to is we're talking about cold storage, but as small to medium-sized businesses, you have lots of storage needs. So like dry storage, packing space, shipping area, people to help with packaging. And so like putting all of those sort of needs together in a single location seems like it would be really useful for a lot of folks. And then maybe one other input to add to your sort of list of things you need. Another question is, so, we fish out of Cordova. We live in Anchorage during the school year, and there is no cold storage in Cordova. There's a little bit in Anchorage. So the question is, as cold storage is built, should it be built in all communities, like small ones, or should it be really focused in hub communities? Because if it's in hub communities, that adds additional shipping cost for the people that are using it, because we've got to get it out of those small communities into the central location. So sort of like thinking about that that strategically if we had the magic buttons to like create our little food storage empire across Alaska, thinking about where it should be located to serve people seems like an important aspect.
Very good. Thanks, Micah. At this point, we have breaking news. I'd like to introduce Fred Vila. He put in a really nice comment in the chat, was extremely timely. I remember Fred when he was with the University of Alaska, the workforce development. Now he's with the governor's office as part of their development team. And he put some comments. Could we open up the microphone for Fred?
Good afternoon, Brian. It was good to see you. Right away, you're the first person I saw, and it's nice to reconnect. So yeah, I am working in the governor's office now, and I'm the team lead for the Alaska development team. Our job really is to help to grow and really expand industry across the state of Alaska. I think what I'm seeing right now is, we're known worldwide as a oil and gas state, a hydrocarbon state, but frankly, our job is really to have whoever you talk to, wherever you are in the world, identify Alaska as a state of X. And if you're talking to agriculture folks or maritime folks or seafood folks or broadband folks, hopefully they're gonna have at the top of their tongue, I know about that industry in Alaska. Personally, my area of focus is in agriculture. I grew up in South Dakota. I was a hired hand for a couple of years. I've raised hundreds and hundreds of head of livestock when I was living in the interior. I just recently moved down to the valley, but this is a passion for me. Our 8 kids raised animals from breed stock all the way to market, and they learned how to do it. And so it was very exciting for us to be a part of that. And then to join the governor's team, this is one of 2 areas that he really wanted me to focus on. One was the university and one was ag. And there isn't a day that goes by that I see him that he doesn't ask me, where are we at with agriculture? So I really am doing a lot of listening right now and research to try to understand more fully from the commercialization side of agriculture and the industry, how the supply chain is working or isn't working, where are some of the hiccups, where are the gaps from the grower side, the wholesale consumer side, and really where the biggest gap that I'm seeing right now is in what I'm calling, and stealing the broadband terminology of the middle mile. And that middle mile being the processing side of it. So the farmer produces, the grower produces, and there's a consumer out there, but somewhere in between there, the product needs some value added processing to meet the demand of the consumer themselves. And so I'm learning more and more and trying to get some research to find out what are those consumer demands, whether they're wholesale or direct marketing, that consumer piece, what are those needs, and how can we partner or remove barriers to close that gap, to bring that closer? Because there was a situation, I'm sorry, I'm kind of pontificating here, but somebody asked me just the other day, why in the world are we selling Alaska grown milk at $6.50 a gallon when people can buy it for $3 a gallon in the store? And for me, it's simple. It's quality, and people want to buy Alaskan. So that's what the market will bear. But we need to displace that culture of low cost buying is the better buying to quality and really investing in our state. And to meet that goal, we're going to have to do a better job of changing the culture, the consumer culture in Alaska, and also expand the opportunity to process and get that product that people want in Alaska, that's made in Alaska, to buy Alaskan. So I'm looking at trying to understand those gaps and not only just better that culture, but meet the demand of our local consumers, because we have people here in Alaska that want to produce more. We have people that want to buy more. And so now we have to bridge that to producing. And so that's where I think the sustainable market, the food security will land, is if we can have a greater sustainable market within Alaska, then we can become more dependent on Alaskan growers. Good for the farmers, good for the people, good for our health. So I'll end my pontificating there, Brian, but thank you for the opportunity to get in. And I do really look forward to, I'm going to meet with Robbie and Rachel on Monday and check out the Kellogg farm. And we're going to talk more about this in greater depth. So look at listening more about the conversation today, particularly on storage.
Excellent, Fred. Don't mind the pontification because it's essentially music to the ears of the Alaska Food Policy Council. We've been trying to figure this out for many years. At this point, if you don't mind, I'd like to also introduce Frances Ball, who's with Launch Alaska, a deployment accelerator in Anchorage. I've never met Frances, but she's interested in the opportunities. And do you want to be part of this conversation, Frances?
Sure, thanks, Brian. And sorry, my internet's a bit slow, so I don't have my video on right now. But yeah, pretty much just what I said in the chat. We're always looking to expand our accelerator more into the food space, and that's been challenging to find the right fits in Alaska in the past. Rachel has called out this area as one that's really important. And so we're always just trying to learn more and see if there's a possibility for us to find startups in this space that could help solve some of those challenges that we could either find within Alaska or bring up to Alaska to help in this space.
All right, excellent. Well, now let's go return to our quintet of speakers on the panel. You heard a lot of interesting conversation from people who aren't on the panel. So who wants to go? Floor is yours.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'd love to add to this discussion. It is an interesting question when you ask the question, who is ultimately responsible? Because I agree, I don't know that there's really one solid answer to that. I certainly think, like, as a business owner, if I am looking to expand my operation, ultimately it's my responsibility to find the resources in order to do that. But at the same time, I do think that we can bring more producers along faster if we do pool resources. I think it does make sense for the state and other government agencies to invest infrastructure at airports and other locations to make transportation of those food items easier. Certainly some of the things people have brought up in terms of actually getting their food from one location to another in a safe manner is huge. That's a big issue for Alaska, and I think that makes sense to invest in that location. Personally, for us, I really like the idea of, and something that we're utilizing is like state revolving loans. Loan funds, things like that, anything that can keep interest rates low, but at the same time provides an economic incentive for business owners to invest in this market. Because I do think there is a very large, there's a huge market that could be taken advantage of, not necessarily to make it too expensive, but just to provide the obvious need that a lot of producers around the state need. And I do think the revolving loans and like other investors, it makes sense for, you know, someone to give the opportunity for a business like, you know, us or other areas, other people in the state to, you know, provide that business model for others. And then we talked a lot about just the cost of running the facility. And one of the things that, you know, I'm really excited about in terms of having this type of larger storage space and where it makes sense to pool people's resources is you can start to take advantage of alternative energy methods besides just straight electricity from the grid. So realizing that, you know, of course, long-term storage, there is kind of a seasonal push for it, but at the same time, livestock operators like myself, like we kind of need cold storage year round. In the summertime, just to store our product in case it's not all sold, and the wintertime to store it when there are animals growing and we can sell through to even out cash flow. In the summertime, we can take advantage of the sun, you know, like solar panels, that would be a great option. There's also things like combined heat and power units, which for Alaska is a really great option. You know, you can use the electricity to run the cold storage area and then use the heat that comes from off of that to heat an office space or a high tunnel that's next to it or something like that.
Okay.
And even, you know, with natural gas coming down, like it's becoming a more and more efficient fuel here in the state. And I just think there are a lot of options that you can take advantage when you move beyond the really small chest freezer stage that actually makes cold storage more efficient and therefore more affordable to producers all over.
Great. Thank you for that. Let's go back to have Jody come into the conversation. That, you know, when I was with the university, I was, you know, with 30 years experience as a food scientist. Quality and safety are top of my agenda. Now that you're in charge of the experiment farm, what kind of projects are you going to do, let's say, in terms of the ag scientists that we have left on the faculty that might be involved in doing feasibility studies and doing some test studies? I mean, because I know you do the agricultural test plots, but what about the holding of the product and determining its shelf life, for example, or its loss of nutrients? Are there any plans within the I can't remember, it was I can't remember the acronym. It changes every few years with it used to be School of Ag.
Oh, yeah, sure, Brian. I'd be happy to. We have been kind of gutted with regards to our faculty support. It was always seen as low-hanging fruit, the School of Agriculture at the university. And, you know, to really answer all your questions, I'd have to go beyond cold storage. So I'm just going to say we don't have any direct plans for any of the work that you just suggested because we do not have faculty to support that work. We do not have ag economists on site or even anywhere in the UA system through UAF. And, you know, balancing budgets through attrition gets you to this point. My human capital here at the facility is incredibly low. However, we do a tremendous amount with the few who are here, and most of our work is being done by staff. And specifically, the work that I think is the most relevant to this is we're working on developing a research project on the use of cool bots as an option for the small producers. And now when we speak of producers, we're speaking of not just vegetable and food producers, but we're also speaking of peony farmers, which peonies are the largest exported agricultural crop in the state of Alaska. And cold storage and cold chain maintenance is mandatory to receive an excellent product and to get the price that the peony growers need per bloom to justify their existence. So it is such a new technology, not sort of, but kind of. A coolbot is basically a robot that a computer about $300 to $400 that hijacks a typical window unit air conditioning system and can drive the temperature beyond the limits of what a normal room would be at in terms of an air conditioner unit. And you can drive it down to about 34 36 degrees in a room. Of course, a lot of the work that we're going to try to research is, what does that room look like for the most efficient purpose? As Aaron was saying, I mean, there's so many opportunities to plug in, pun intended, to different resources or sources of energy. But if you don't insulate your facility well, you're going to lose all of that cold right out the floor. And so we're going to work with the plan right now, if it's approved, is we'll be working with, it's myself, a student, and we'll be bringing in hopefully a construction engineer and possibly and we'll be also working on developing this with multiple producers in the valley here that are using CoolBots. And so, I think there were a lot of things that were brought up earlier. And I think that the responsibility for cold storage infrastructure is, I think when we answer that question, we'll solve a whole lot of other things as well. But I just don't see that as being a simple answer. And I agree with Aaron in terms of the complexity of it, looking at, I know there are small producers who are figuring it out on their own. I know that there are medium-sized producers who are doing that. I know there are large producers who have their own cold storage because that's what they do. I know that there are communities that have community-wide cold storage. It's the entire facility is available for the community. They figured out a way to do it. And it was a big push on food sovereignty for Kotzebue specifically. So I think that there's so many different drivers because this is a complex system. There are so many different areas of emphasis, and there's so many different players. You've got school districts who need to get fresh food to the students. You've got just the communities with the individuals themselves. You've got these communities like Ronaldo is trying to develop, agriculture in communities that haven't had ag before. They're going to have storage. And then we also have our fishing industry, which is huge. And you have a community like Cordova, which is, revolves around the fishing industry and the seafood industry and now kelp. And yet you don't have cold storage opportunities. So I think that it's a hugely complex, very involved answer to a multi-layered, super intricate question that you can write in one sentence with a question mark at the end, but it's a dissertation or two's worth of an answer.
Let's go back to another academic. Rachel, I think you had your hand up. Did you want to? No? Okay.
I didn't. I was just aggressively agreeing with.
Oh, I'm sorry. I see the hand was like, I think that's like, I want to get in there. And well, we have another academic, Micah. You've touched on some stuff, but before I jump to you, I think, the CoolBot thing is really interesting with the peony. So then the window of activity for peony growers would be what, May through July?
It depends on where in the state, Brian, but yeah, generally the whole goal is June and July, because that's when they're the most in demand in the lower 48, and that's when they're not available in the lower 48 because they've already bloomed out. So that's why we're able to get those prices. Yes. Exactly.
So then the other 10 months for all those ag growers, there needs to be a connectivity so that you make efficient use of that system. Otherwise, I would think the peony growers would then turn the switch off in July and then wait till June. And then it's just sitting there unused. So efficiency within the infrastructure is probably key because, as people are talking about miniaturizing energy sources, and we can talk about small scale nuclear reactors. That seems to be coming up as a suggestion. Small scale freezing, cooling capacity probably is manageable from an economic standpoint, because the last thing you want to do with a cold storage facility, and we know this in our own homes, you pack so much in there and then a year later say, why do we still have this stuff in here? And so over a year, you know, if you have fish that's over a year old in the freezer, it's not going to be that great as when it was on the hook, right? So let's turn to our panel to respond.
Well, Brian, I think just really quickly, I think that the things that you brought up are totally legitimate. And then you also need to think about kind of the engineering of a cooling system. It's not a system that is one of those light switch systems where you flip it on when you need it, you flip it off. It's most efficient when it's always running. And so in order for us to think about the design of efficient cooling systems that support industry and individuals and communities, we also need to think about that timing component, and that is that cooling unit sitting not running longer than it's running each year. And if that's the case, there's a problem, because you're going to end up with more broken pieces, and then you need people who have training and expertise in heating and cooling units to fix those problems, which is workforce development. And again, now we've just blown this up into a system discussion. But I think that, you know, the units that we're all talking about are not, you know, just simply on-demand plug and chug type units. These are units that are most efficient when they're running all the time.
Excellent. Micah, let's turn to you.
I was just going to throw one little thing in there that you made me think of, Jody, is that, you know, I think I even said also, like, we have this seasonal demand. Obviously, we have salmon runs in the summertime, and then we need to be able to store it. In contrast to peonies, I think most people are doing flash frozen fish. And so we need to stay frozen. But in theory, they could be frozen all winter, and it would really extend the season for fishermen to be able to sell their fish over the winter. My thought, at least based on our experience, and other fishermen on the call can definitely give me their thoughts too, but one reason we don't do that is because the other pieces and parts aren't there. So like shipping and packing help and all of those other things. And so we try to consolidate our marketing season also. And it's both to limit cold storage rental over the year, and also just because to cut our logistics down. But if in addition, as we're building out cold storage, if we're sort of thinking about all those other, supporting those other business needs, like in theory, it would incentivize people. Like I think people would naturally want to be able to sell their product over the winter time if they had help with all the other pieces and parts, you know? So there's kind of a give and take there, maybe between like what we need, what we say we need now, and what could be possible if the infrastructure was.
Exactly. And as we're thinking from the economy, it's fisheries, right? So let's go back to Ronaldo.
Well, so my mind, and I'm listening and I'm hearing about all these businesses, but my mind goes to some of the people in these communities. I've heard from some of our partners that live in the far north. They've used the permaculture and they've used the permafrost to store their food in for generations, forever. And now that's melting. And it is melting at such a fast rate, they can no longer store their subsistence foods or anything else in this. And they literally do not know what to do, because they can't just bring in a chest freezer and it's going to cover the community, and it's not efficient for them to bring in a chest freezer just for themselves. And so that's one of the things that we will be looking at, as one of our projects, is how can we help them just store the food to feed their people? Because if they can't store their food year round, they're not going to have food, year round. And so we have to look at that, and we have to take that into consideration. This is beyond the economics and beyond somebody, a business. It's actually feeding our people and keeping them fed throughout the year, where they don't worry about their running out of food. And that's happening more and more in some of our communities, and people are not realizing that. I know in Bristol Bay, there is a big surge of people interested in agriculture and starting farms. Like a couple seasons ago, there was just a farm with chickens, and now there's multiple farms in King Salmon, Naknek, which is great, but then they don't have the place to store their stuff unless it's in their freezer, it's in, it's in their facility. So they just sell locally right out of their home. And what we want to try to do is get it so that the system works the way it should, and the different communities can actually sell to each other and trade and do different crops and different foods available throughout the year. So.
Okay, great. I really appreciate it. I think that's one of the things that the Alaska Food Policy Council is trying to work with. As you know, we're trying to figure out how to crack that, and it seems like it's again, it's cost for energy and the infrastructure. Melissa, I jotted down that you wrote a 2018 report, and I know I kind of caught you on the spot here. So 2 requests: could you put your report in the chat at some point? And then second of all, with your vast knowledge on this, do you have some solutions, like the way forward? Let's use the next remaining half hour for discussion. I think we've kind of beat the problem to death, but how about the positive sides that that you've encountered? We don't want to lose the information, though it's 3 years old now, but are you going to do an update? Or are you going to look at another community like in Southeast Alaska? Because now it just rang a bell that I believe Petersburg developed a community-wide cold storage facility, particularly for their fisheries. I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they were able to, their business plan. And quite frankly, I haven't been in touch with Petersburg in many years, so I don't know if it's still in existence, but it's something I will look in. But Melissa, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to, I'll post my email in the chat. The report is only on a PDF, but I can send that out to anyone who's interested. And it is getting a little old. I don't have plans to do an update anytime soon, but I'm happy to if funding is always an issue. So, but I'm always happy to do it. I think, it's interesting. And I think, as Ronaldo said, like the conversation really does need to be statewide focused. And I think sometimes these conversations about cold storage are focused on the seasonality of some of these fishing communities and then working around those demands and needs. But there's a lot of other things happening. And with really the rapidly changing climate that we're experiencing all throughout, there's, some of these changes are moving. And as some of the projections are showing, salmon are going to be a lot farther north than they are now at some point, however much time that, there's things that are happening. And so I think also thinking about 10-year projections and 20-year projections as we're thinking about big infrastructure investments is going to be really important. And sooner than later, the lack of permafrost is a really big issue that I think the state definitely needs to be dealing with yesterday, as far as how to make sure that there's reliable and affordable solutions to those problems. I think that the high note is that people are thinking about it, and that there are some entrepreneurial ways for people to turn it into business ventures and make some money off of it. And there's some great training opportunities. I think with some of these bigger refrigeration systems that are going in, like Jody mentioned, the maintenance and installation is huge. And I know a lot of folks that want to put these things in, but finding someone to do it also very hard. And so I think there's a big opening there as far as job entry, that if you don't want to be a farmer, but there's a lot of other things you can do in the food system. There's a lot of economic opportunity there. And I think there's because of the type of scale we have in Alaska, from very small scale farmers to medium and larger, there's just the scaling varies so much for both farming and fishermen and all the other food production that's done in the state. There's easy entry points if you want to come in with a 25, a smaller unit that would serve 25 smaller customers, or a couple huge ones. Like, there's different entry points for different folks, and I think that's kind of a unique opportunity for Alaska that we might not see in other parts of the lower 48, where everything is just at a much larger scale. And I think that's really encouraging. And just people are, the conversations around this are really happening, and people are thinking about it, and resources are starting to come together, I think, a little bit more. And just the idea of people starting to think about, if like blood, sweat, and tears, no, blood, sweat, and farm. Food, sorry.
I'm sure there's some tears. It's farming.
We get that a lot, trust me, it's fine.
I think that the option to also add funding to your business by renting out and providing these additional resources to other people is great. And it covers, especially for, I think, people that are kind of at that pivot point between they know what they're doing in their farm and then their productions, and then they're moving, so they're stable, but they have the knowledge and know how to expand out and bring in some other revenue sources. I think that's also really huge. And so I'm hopeful, and I think, Alaskans we're resilient and smart, and we're good at working together and figuring out these solutions. So I think that's also something we have going for us in this whole problem.
Great, Melissa. Funding. We know about that, but we do know there's going to be a lot of funding coming to Alaska. We also know there are some permanent organizations such as USDA. You can go to them for grants and loans. And also we have now a pipeline with the micro grants. So it will be very interesting to see if any applicants have put in for a micro chill. Erin says yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So, part of the thing is, if you have the funding, then you can do something to reduce costs. That's the way, it's just the name of the game, because, unless there's some kind of endowment that comes, or a foundation or philanthropic organization. So seeking the funding will essentially solve some of these problems bit by bit. Obviously, it won't be overnight. I do notice we have a couple of other AFPC members that have different angles into the food systems. Amy Seitz, Heidi Radar, Evie Witten. If any of you would like to provide a comment, because you come from different angles and different backgrounds and different communities that you serve, to add to this conversation, we've got a little bit of time left. Okay, if not, then Rachel or Robbie.
Oh, I could jump in. This is Heidi Rader.
Yay.
I was just gonna say, I'm on a food security group for the Tanana Chiefs Conference as well, and transportation has come up as the biggest barrier to food security. And apparently there's talk of organizing airlines to figure out the freight issue along those lines too. But yeah, it's a huge issue for remote small villages like there are in interior Alaska.
Okay, and also we have another attendee, Nick Bachman. You're out of Anchorage, and you're dealing with community farms and all. Have you addressed the question about how you're going to keep the products cold when people are expanding into ag? Do you have a comment on that?
Sure, I'd be happy to speak to that. We, between 2019 and 2020, we installed a CoolBot at Grow North Farm in a cold storage facility that is about 7 feet wide, 11 feet long. And that has been just the right size for our half acre of production. This year, we're going to be able to operate our 50-person CSA on one day of the week, and then do additional. Doing that on Wednesday, we'll have more boxes going on Thursday, and then everyone will be able to use it on Friday to prepare for market. From 2019 to 2020, we saw almost a 4 times increase in revenue for the farmers at Grow North. And in exit interviews at the end of the fall, all of the farmers, and just what we saw day to day, they all really said, hey, the cold storage is what changed the game for our business. And that's really what allowed them to profit in the way they did in that year. It's definitely exciting to hear this conversation and think about how you know, we're doing a half-acre urban farm. We want to expand, and we love the idea of more acreage in Anchorage, but we all know that to turn the food system around, we need to be talking about square miles here and how are we going to be storing some of that food. So it's really exciting to see and hear about some of these larger investments and what these freight options and possible, you know, flexible transportation and cold storage options could look like for our state.
Excellent, Nick. You know, a great model for small scale development and for scaling up. And then of course, the flip side of that is if you get too big, it's not very efficient or good either. So there's got to be some happy medium depending on location, and whatever the food or foods or perishables that you're trying to hold, stabilize before it gets the customer in, maintaining that prime quality.
And one thing I would add there is I loved, Fred, your framing of the middle mile. And that's something that was kind of like an unseen benefit of our cold storage, is that we have folks who will do hot food on Thursdays at the farm. This year, we're probably gonna have that every Thursday. And we've worked with the Muni to make it so we can have commissary cold storage at the farm and really use that space to have flexibility in when these operations that are small and scaling can affordably store their food and possibly cook on site or cook at different locations. But having that really low cost access to cold storage has really opened up kind of a diversity of business options for the farmers and other entrepreneurs who use the space.
Fred, would you like to respond or reply?
Brian, I am so pleased to have been listening in on this call today. I can't even tell you. There's a lot of great takeaways, a lot of good terminology that I'm hearing. Certainly the passion and the opportunity, I think, is huge. I appreciate, and I don't know her first name, but Anguson's comment about the, somebody else's comment about extending that marketing season, but also the food security for the local community by having the storage facilities available. That perspective really talks about extending that market, making it more sustainable instead of extending the season, really. And so I just wanted to let you know, this is not going to get lost on me. Brian, you know me well enough that I'm gonna get through this, but I'm in an apolitical role. And so I'm really looking at creating a quick but expedited system in learning and trying to figure out where the investments can happen. I'm meeting with the Division of Ag Director on a weekly basis. And this has been a conversation that's moving fairly quickly. And I am, just want to let you know, there is some proposals, recommendations regarding food security, food storage, food safety, food processing that are being discussed. And so what gets funded, that's outside of my realm, but I certainly can make recommendations. You got a strong advocate, certainly, from me, and I'll continue to be part of these conversations and really listening sessions. So thanks so much to everybody. I really appreciate it. I got a page full of notes, and I'm going to go back and listen to every one of the sessions that you guys have had this year. I just saw the inventorium, and I'm disappointed I missed them. But I thank you so much for carrying the water, and I'm going to do the same. So thank you.
Great, Fred. And before you leave, could you put your email in the chat so we have that, so anyone who wants to contact you with post webinar, because we probably didn't have enough time to go really deep, but we don't want to exhaust everybody. We only have about 18 minutes left, but again, really appreciate that you're in the position that you're in, because at one time the Alaska Food Policy Council, well, one of the reasons why the Alaska Food Policy Council was developed, because the state of Alaska governor's office was going to have a food security cabinet, and that just never really materialized. And then out of those ashes came Alaska Food Policy Council around 2010. So timing is everything. I'm sort of like out of questions and comments, but Rachel and Robbie, where do you want to go with this last few minutes, or do we want to let people go?
Yeah, certainly don't need to hang out and talk more about these problems. I think that today we've seen problems lined out pretty nicely. Turns out it's everything, and food is connected to all, infrastructure, consumer demand, marketing. I love that the point today came up that it's important to invest in the food system, but consumers can't always vote with their dollar. I'm from a community that it was easier to buy soda than milk, and that's what you bought because that's what you could feed your family. So I think that this is a complex conversation, and all of our panelists have made that point, and I really appreciate that. I also know that there's a lot more that people have to say on here that maybe you might not feel comfortable chatting or speaking up, and so here again in the chat is a link to a questionnaire. So if you want to take some time to fill that out, you're welcome to be as concise or as thoughtful as you'd like to be. And we're aggregating all of this feedback that will be put forth on our website. And if you want updates on where we're posting these things, please sign up for our newsletter. Yeah, and we can open the floor for comments, questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself and talk. Very grateful to Launch Alaska and Fred Villa for showing up and talking off the cuff and on the spot today. This is why I love working in food in Alaska, is because you can show up and there's really important people in the room who are willing to share. So would anybody like to comment or turn on their mics?
This is Annette Marley. I'll put on my video here so you can hear me. So I work at Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium with the Wellness Strategies for Health program, and our main purpose is to help reduce chronic disease among Alaska Native people. And one of our strategies is to improve access to healthy food. And I've always got the lens of how somebody in a remote, off the road community, how they can have better access to affordable, healthy food. And I know that a lot of you are speaking from the perspective of grower and sustainability perspective, which is absolutely valuable as well. But I'm just wondering, what kind of feedback is there from maybe a particular or subset of you who are looking at this from sort of a health perspective? I know about the ice cellars and some of the issues around storage of subsistence foods, but I guess particularly I'm thinking about consumer ability to access healthy foods at small rural grocery stores. So this discussion here is about storage, and I guess the question is just generally broad strokes, where are some big areas that like maybe my program could look at for being involved in to help make things move along with improving that cold chain access to small communities.
Thank you, Annette. Appreciate the comments.
I mean, Annette, just to connect, Amy, I didn't see when her comment came in, but actually maybe one link, she notes that in addition to sort of thinking about different uses of these places over wintertime is food banks and pantries, which is great and really speaks to more of the food security thing, especially in places maybe where ice cellars aren't working anymore, thinking about, all right, how could this be repurposed for maybe commercial use in the summertime, but then transition more to subsistence storage in the wintertime sort of thing. Could be kind of an interesting dual use.
I think also opening up, access or just access to these facilities for food pantries is a really great, point, just because I know that, our food pantry in Homer, like there would be a wider range of foods that they would accept if they knew that they could store them safely. And I know that there's a lot of, products that we have talked to the food bank about donating simply because they're not quite up to other consumer par, but otherwise are great products, but they just can't store them because they're frozen meat products and they don't really have a good way to do that for large amounts,
Great, thank you. I saw the chat from Ms. Tessa Holmes, and I would like to introduce the panel to Tessa. She is a Vista with the Interior Alaska Food Network, and I'd like to open up the floor to Tessa because she knows a lot of stuff, and she just moved to the state only recently. So as we're talking about AFPC, encouraging youth, you seem to be much younger than me. So would you like to talk about the things you put in the chat?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm Vista who moved up to Fairbanks last August. So I'm really enjoying getting involved with the Alaska Food Policy Council. And yeah, I just kind of put a comment in there about, potentially there's some energy projects or pilot programs that might already have some funding in place, structures in place, and potentially it could be a way to kind of incorporate cold storage in some of these other existing programs, because like we've all said, it's a systems issue. And so if there's some money, it's some way related to energy that can also be used to fund some of these infrastructure, food security issues. Cold storage is also an energy issue as much as it is, a food issue. So I really just threw that out there as kind of an idea, and I'm just looking through responses now. I saw someone from Launch Alaska, Pam, also commented on that, and I knew that they had actually had some microgrid renewable pilot programs. So glad to see that there's a bunch of people here in this conversation from diverse areas.
Excellent. Thank you, Tessa. And when we talk about energy and all, there are two organizations that we haven't mentioned that should be part of the future conversation. One is the Alaska Energy Authority, right? And then also the Alaska Center for Energy and Power up in Fairbanks. I assume they have some very bright people, and if we could just kind of coerce them to work on the food system side of things, unless they're already doing it. I really don't know what kind of projects they've been involved with, but if we want to reduce the cost of energy, if we want to go to those alternative sources, maybe they're looking at, all sorts of other low cost energy things that can run a cool bot, for example. I don't know what the power usage is, but if someone can show the comparison is, well, diesel's up here, gas is over here, renewable energy, wind power, like Kodiak gets 20% of its energy from wind, 80% from hydro. They need to be part of the conversation. So that's food for thought in the future as we're talking food systems, infrastructure. Economy means what does it cost to get product from A to B at a reasonable cost for all Alaskans to enjoy at a reasonable amount, and that the farmers and the ag and the others who, like Aaron, who are growing the meat, that they're getting a fair wage for their blood, sweat, and tears.
Brian, really quickly, I think too, in that conversation, if we were to, or if the Alaska Food Policy Council were to, support that conversation, I think another invite should be the Cold Climate Housing Research Institute in Fairbanks, because I think, none of us are in disagreement here that we're talking about incredibly complicated systems. And even though the Cold Climate Housing Research Center is, in its name is about housing, the work that they've done on so many different levels of just things that we're talking about that we spoke of today, I think bringing them into that conversation with that infrastructure component and that materials side of things that we're not really speaking to as much, but they've certainly looked at all of these different energy inputs and resources as potential for, obviously running a home, but within that, there is also that cold storage potential. So I think that I would also ask to include that group as well. And I think that it'd be a fascinating conversation.
Excellent. I forgot about that one, Jody. You're such a smart egg. I appreciate it. Well, I'm done moderating. I'm going to turn back over to Rachel for closing comments because we only have about a few minutes left. Thank you all panelists and everyone who I picked on because you were in the room. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, thanks to Brian for facilitating and recognizing who showed up when they did. This is the type of conversation that we want to have more of. And unfortunately, in the past year, it's been really hard to do so. But now that everyone in the entire universe is a Zoom expert, we're ready to have more of these dialogues. So thanks for spending your lunch hour with us. Thanks for giving your time and energy. Again, there's, as we learned today, many more voices could be at the table. And so we will keep having this discussion series that will likely go beyond 2021. And I want to point out one more time in the chat, if you have more input for us about cold storage, about the Marine Highway, about Alaska Bypass, or about other food systems infrastructure improvements, please put it in the survey or questionnaire that I have in the chat, and that would be really helpful. And just once again, thanks to my colleagues at the Alaska Food Policy Council for all working together to make things like this happen. Those of you who are not yet a member, we have a free membership or a paid membership. Donations help things like this happen. We are always in pursuit of trying to compensate people for their time and knowledge, because it takes work to become an expert. And so if you want to help us out that way, we would love to talk more. So our link, akfoodpolicycouncil.org, is in the chat. Thanks so much to everyone.
Yeah, and I just wanted to put a plug in. We are doing these quarterly. So our next food system workshop or webinar will be in April, May, July. Great time for a webinar, but yeah, stay on the lookout for those details, and we will definitely record it because we know everyone is busy in July.
Yeah. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks.